At Volkswagen Lease Summit, car buying's as easy as 1, 2, 3. All our new cars are priced to lease at $199, $299, or $399 a month. Plus, we have rates as low as 1.9% for 60 months and used cars for every budget. We make car buying easy. Get to VWLeaseSummit.com.
I wanted to take a couple of minutes and tie Anthony Fauci to crime in Kansas City. And if you're thinking, how is that possible, follow me here on this, okay? Because I do think there is a direct correlation between these two. Now, is Anthony Fauci the reason for crime in Kansas City? No. You know, that ties back to poor public policy, bad prosecutors, attempts to defund the police, not valuing law enforcement, being down 300 cops. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that are more direct than Anthony Fauci. But with Anthony Fauci being back in the news cycle this week, and he was testifying on Capitol Hill, of course, he was up there and he was meandering about how he basically made up 6-foot social distancing guidelines. He had nothing on kids wearing masks, and how most of what he kind of pushed for was more or less made up. Now, if you want to give him some grace, and I inherently don't want to, but I try to be a better person. If you want to give him some grace and say, we were in an unprecedented time and nobody knew what to do and people were dying left and right, and you want to say, hey, the first couple of months, we got to, basically batten down the hatches and we've got to protect everybody at all costs, you can give Tony Fauci some grace. Once again, I'm not wanting to do that. But in an effort to be a better person, I will make the case and say, okay, fine. For a first few weeks, first couple of months, no one's dealt with something like this in our lifetimes. So maybe we do everything we can possibly do to save as many people as possible. But as it became very evident that younger people and healthy people were not at risk here, the downside of not having kids in school, the downside of not having kids socially interacting with each other, the downside of having kids in masks became very apparent after just a few short months. But you had tyrants like Anthony Fauci trying to continue this stuff until the end of time. There was really no end in sight. And that became Tony Fauci's MO. That became, he became the face of all the lockdown, shutdown stuff. And in fact, there were times when he was knocking then President Trump for not doing more on a national level to lock down, the shutdown, to do mask mandates and everything else. He was knocking him for that. So with Tony Fauci being on Capitol Hill this week, he was back in the news cycle. And I put up some stuff on X. I didn't think it was anything too crazy. But somebody sent me this tweet. I've got all these different trolls who are always looking to have a good time at my expense, and usually I can laugh along. But one said to me, it'll be 2034, so 10 years from now, and Pete Mundo and his crew, you guys good with that? You good being part of the crew? A couple of cronies in there, John and Mark?
Yeah, I'll take the guaranteed employment.
It'll be 2034, and Pete Mundo and his crew are going to be talking about Fauci. And I felt the need to respond to that because this is what needs to be said. If history does its job, we will talk about Anthony Fauci long beyond 2034. And very little of it will be positive. You have to learn from your historical mistakes. And if you don't, you're going to repeat them. And I find it fascinating that now many want to be like, oh, come on, man, that was 4 years ago. Come on, let bygones be bygones. That's so yesterday's news. Say the same people who have been telling me that, we'd have beachfront property in Kansas City at some point in the last 30 years, and as far as I can tell, we still don't. So that's fascinating. The glaciers are going to melt by 1978 crowd are now telling me I can't talk about a guy who set back an entire generation with his awful suggestions and policies. Huh.
It's funny we have a rip in the time continuum fabric now.
Yeah.
When was Trump's deal with Stormy Daniels?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was a long time ago.
Yes.
Right? Come on. Right? Does it matter or not?
That's a great point.
The Fauci thing was the news of the day. He was on trial.
Well, that's what I mean. I'm just not talking about Fauci because I feel like it. Trust me, I don't want to hear that guy's voice. His voice makes me want to puke. So I don't need to hear it. But he was in the news this week. And since he was in the news this week, we talked about it because, believe it or not, what we do here is we talk about the news.
Talk about a bombshell.
So with all that being said, when Anthony Fauci's in the news, we're going to talk about him, and history cannot forget that period of time in 2020 and how detrimental it was. And frankly, we are not going to know for decades just how detrimental it was. To tie this into Kansas City, what have we dealt with the last couple of years? Record-setting homicide numbers. And you've seen this in many urban parts of America. You've seen nothing but increases in crime over the last 4 years. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. Some of that, yes, was the defund the police, George Floyd, peaceful protests, burned down the precinct crowd. That absolutely is true. But as we look back at a period of time when schools were shut down, at the expense of public safety, we were told what really happened. What really happened is that, kids in more upper income school districts, Blue Valley, places like that, they probably had a parent who maybe could stay home. Maybe mom and dad were working from home. They could keep tabs on the kids. Who was most vulnerable during that time? Single mom trying to get by, 2-3 kids, got to go to work, got to make ends meet, stimulus checks only going so far. There's really no one around to watch the kids. The kids are supposed to be home. They're supposed to pop open this laptop and go on Zoom. They're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. They're really not doing that. They suddenly have a lot more time on their hands. They're maybe getting involved in the wrong crowds in their neighborhood because they have, unfortunately, subpar neighborhoods where bad actors are rolling around street corners left and right. And they're getting caught up in all that. And that happened basically from March of 20, in some cases well into the fall of 2020. And here we are 4 years later, and we are still reaping what we sowed from that time. I don't think it's a coincidence that those involved in crime in Kansas City and elsewhere around the country are younger than ever before. I mean, look at the thugs involved with the Super Bowl shootings, right? A couple of them are minors. And that's been a trend that politicians and those in public safety are trying to figure out why it seems like hardened criminals are younger than they've ever been. I think it's partially because these people were preyed on 4 years ago when they were very vulnerable. And they were out of school and there was no direction. And that's what was happening in some of the low-income, rough neighborhoods in Kansas City and around the country. And no one talked about it. Because we sat here and we said, it's great. You're going to pop over the laptop at home. It's going to be good. Mom's at the house. It's okay. Keep tabs on the kids. A lot of neighborhoods, that could not happen. In the most vulnerable neighborhoods, that could not happen. Whether it's because there weren't two parents home in the house or both parents had to work just to make ends meet, those communities were much more likely to be harder hit. So what did it do? It only, theoretically, I believe, will grow the wealth gap, the education gap, for an entire generation. That's what the outcome's going to be. And we're not going to have the data on this for years, but I think we're already starting to see it. When the criminals are younger than they've ever been, this ties back to where these people were in their lives 4 years ago. And that's why I'm not going to, when Anthony Fauci's in the news, I'm not going to sit here and forget about it. I'm not. I'm not going to sit here and act like we just, that was 4 years ago, we're going to move on. No, because we're still paying the price in Kansas City and around the country.
At Volkswagen Lease Summit, car buying's as easy as 1, 2, 3. All our new cars are priced to lease at $199, $299, or $399 a month. Plus, we have rates as low as 1.9% for 60 months and used cars for every budget. We make car buying easy. Get to VWLeaseSummit.com.